Greetings and welcome to Maya 2013-101, week number the 2nd, where we are going to be setting up the scene that we'll be handling for our project. Now, this class, and probably every other class from here on out, is going to have kind of a straightforward approach to the workflow, where I'm going to talk about what we're going to do for a few minutes. I'm going to dive in and start actually doing it, giving you guys frequent pauses for you to catch up and do it on your end. Generally speaking, your homework is going to be pretty much what was on the video, plus a thing or two, just to make sure that you're able to kind of think a little bit on your own and come up with some of your own stuff as well. But generally speaking, as long as you're following along with what I've got on the video, then you're mostly covered for your homework. And I like to keep it that way for the 101 classes, just because some folks are pretty new to this whole thing. Now, some of you have been, hopefully, you've all looked at the overview for the class where we talk about the subjects that we'll be covering, and you know that we'll be doing a cake, and we'll be doing a cherry. Would any of you like to see at least a draft render of what we're going to be doing? Anybody? You can tell me inside of BuzzNet if you'd actually like to see this. Okay, there's a couple of people. I'm just not feeling the enthusiasm, though. All right, I'll give it a try anyway. Here we go. So, I've got a render that, I mean, there's a few more things I wouldn't mind adding, but generally speaking, this gets the entire point across. So I'm going to open up fcheck real quick. If you've never done this, you can just type in fcheck into your run line. As long as you've installed Maya using its default settings, this will open right up. And here's our render test. We just got to let this load in. And here's essentially what we'll be making. Now, if on your end you want to accentuate things and make some adjustments, etc. and so forth, you're going to have all the power in the world to do that. We'll talk about all of that. But there are several things actually going on here that are really easy to kind of overlook because the scene does look at least relatively natural. I mean, aside from the fact that we just have a gray background right now, I didn't put anything in the background. But now, the concept is a bit familiar for those of you who have taken a few Maya classes, but see, I'm a big fan when it comes to learning about animation and whatnot, and really, as far as I'm concerned, Maya is all about some animation. I'm really all about getting into some bouncing, just because it's a nice way to explore animation curves, which we have to talk about sooner or later anyway. But we have a little bit of motion blur, so you can see there's a little bit of blur on the cherry as he's coming down. He's squashing and stretching, so already we're stepping away from what was going on with the workshops, because right now he's kind of stretched up into the air, and here he's kind of flattened out. You'll see he's also kind of rocking into his bounces, so he becomes less like he's a bouncing object being rolled across the table, and more like a character that is actually leaping forward and trying to make it to the cake. If you take a really close look at his stem, and I realize there's a lot of motion blur there, but his stem is also animated. So when he goes up into the air, you see it kind of stretches out. Excuse me. And then it crushes back down when he bounces up. So there's a little bit of gravity, some secondary animation there. And then he lands, and there's a little bit of wobble on the stem at the very end, just for added effect. Now, excuse me, on this particular render, because I'll be honest, this is just a research and development render for me to kind of test what's going on and the direction that I want to take the class. But in this particular render, you can't see very well, but if you look really, really closely, which I guess is probably about as close as we're going to get right now, the whipped cream is actually deforming a little bit when the cherry hits it, so we're going to make the whipped cream just kind of bend around just a little bit. The cake is a pretty basic object. We're actually going to build all of this stuff today. We're going to build the cherry, we're going to build the plate, we're going to build the cake. We'll probably go ahead and put the whipped cream on top. But the icing for the cake is actually done using a texture that I created several years ago now for the Unreal books, and I actually had to dig it off of one of my CDs, actually. And it has been reappropriated in a really nice way. I remember thinking when I was making the texture back in ZBrush a long time ago that actually, I'm sorry, it is a DVD, but it's a disc that is compact. Anyway, I remember thinking that the way I was making the texture was a lot like pulling a knife through icing, and I remembered that. And so I was thinking, well, maybe I could just use it to make the chocolate icing look a little more believable, and I think it's doing a really, really good job. In fact, I showed an early render to somebody here at the house, and she thought it was real, but, you know, she's not a CG person. Anyway, so this is what we're going to be doing. Are there any questions about this before we actually get rolling? Boing, boing, boing. Is it a food? All right, well, I'm not seeing any questions, so I guess we can go ahead and kind of get started. So I'll put away F-check for the time being. And let's... Oh, yeah, I don't even have Maya running. I suppose it would help if I'm going to teach a Maya class to go ahead and launch Maya. The background image can be added later. And like I said, this was a preliminary render just to get the concepts that I wanted to teach kind of in place. Or when looked at another way, to make sure that what I wanted to do was going to be nice and smoothly achievable in the time frame that I wanted to do everything. Okay, so the first thing you need to do when completing any project in Maya, and this is so critical and it's so easy to overlook, is always, always, always remember your project. This should be the first thing you do when doing anything new inside of Maya. It's easy to forget, especially if you're just kind of, if you're exploring and getting used to things. And I don't want you to forget that. I want you all to be really good, proficient Maya users. So, the very first thing we'll do is go to File and open up the project window. Now, once you get this, just click on the New button on the right-hand side, like so. And really, all I want you to do is to give this project a name. Now, I don't care what you name it. You can name it anything you like, but I'm going to call this Maya 101. Well, let's do Class 1. Actually, no, I'm changing this. Let's say Tuesday. So I know this is the Tuesday class. The Maya 101 Tuesday, and I'll hit accept. I don't need to change any of these folders. Really, the purpose of this window is to allow you to change the name and or placement of any of the folders in your project. So for instance, we have a scenes folder. Every time you hit Control S, your scenes are going to get saved into the scenes folder. We have another one for images, which is where all of our renders are going to go. Source images, if you want to save in some textures and things like that, it's a good place to put those. So all of these different folders. Now, some of these, most of these actually, we're not even going to use. But for the time being, let's just go ahead and leave everything at their default settings. Make sure you just change the name of your project and hit accept. And here you are. So now, our next step of the process is going to be to create our initial scene. So the set, as well as our character, or if you want to call it characters, if you wanted to call the cake a character and the cherry a character, I suppose you could. But I would say that really the character in this performance is going to be our cherry. And then we also need to create the cake as well. So I'm going to take a request from the audience, okay? We have 3 things that we need to actually model out that require any attention whatsoever. The table is really just a plane. We don't have to worry about that. So we have to do the plate, we have to do the cake, and we have to do the cherry. I don't care what order we do them in because they're all very, very different from one another. So, who votes for doing the plate first? The cream almost doesn't get modeled, just so you know. There's a bunch of plates. There's a couple of boos. All right, how about the cake first? A couple of people for the cake. Now, how about the cherry? Who wants to go ahead and model the cherry? You know, it looked like about the same number of people for everything, so I think I'm just going to model this in the order that I want to, and you guys didn't help me one bit. Like, not even at all. There was no help there. Okay, so let's go back over here. Let's model out a plate. Now, there are a lot of ways to go about modeling a plate. And I did just get a question. Is the icing bump mapped or modeled? It is bump mapped. As a matter of fact, only because I'm feeling particularly friendly right now, let's do this. I'm going to go to recent projects, and I'll switch over to my research folder. Because, you know, I do try to run through this stuff at least once. And I can actually show you the file if you guys want to see the file. Do you want to see the file? Who wants to see the file? Raise your hand. No, don't raise your hand. I'm just going to show you the file anyway. So here's the file. This is exactly where it was when we rendered out. So here's 6, 7. Give Maya a second to catch up so you can see my pretty viewport. Boing, boing, boing. And I mean, we can come in here and take a look specifically at certain objects like the cherry, so you can see a little wobble when he lands. You can really get a feel for that squash and stretch. So he's really doing a lot of transformation while he animates. And the cake, which looks kind of, it's a little chunkier here in the viewport. But here's the geometry for it. Now, we'll probably make our geometry slightly different here. This was kind of R&D based geometry. This was me just kind of figuring out what I wanted things to look like in terms of the cake itself. We really don't need this much geometry. So in the beginning, I was thinking we could actually carve out letters, like you could spell happy birthday on it and sculpt that out. But then I was thinking, that's a little over the top. And getting everybody to do that and paint with their mouse and have it look satisfying without them or me or all of us pulling our respective hair out, I decided was just a little bit over the top. So we'll probably simplify the geometry very slightly, but still, if I just hit 5, you can see what this looks like. Or I can go to shading, and we should be able to turn on flat shade, hardware texturing. What am I looking for? Anybody tell me quick. Use default material probably won't work with a high quality render, so let's go to the default quality and go to use default material. And so here's everything just grayed out. So here's generally what your cake is going to look like by the end of today. It does kind of look like a stack of pancakes in a way, if you want to look at it that way. And then we have the whipped cream, which is just a little coil, which I actually created by using paint effects. And the cherry probably most accurately looks something like this when it's modeled. You notice the stem is a little bit off, but we do some clever things to make that stem work, which we'll get into when we get to the whole rigging and animation process. So there's everything. Now let's go ahead and I'll switch my project back over to our class project and just make a new scene. If you have made your project at this point, your next step should be to go to File and create a new scene. This just makes sure to associate Maya with the project you switched over to. All right, especially if you created a new one. So let's go ahead and just save our scene immediately. So let's go to Save Scene and notice, take a quick moment and note the project folder. So you see that I'm in Users, Documents, Maya Projects, Maya 101 Tuesday, and I'm in the Scenes folder. And we're going to call this Cake Project _1. And go ahead and click Save. Also, I highly recommend you go under Save and make sure that you hit the Options box and switch on Incremental Save. This is really important, especially when you're just starting out, but I mean, I use it to this day, but if you break something along the way, like maybe you've broken a model or broken a rig or your animation's not working and you have to go back to an earlier iteration, this automatically creates those incremental saves for you every time you hit Control S. All right, so Surreal, you're leaving already? We just got here. All right, so let's go ahead and begin with our set. Now this is going to be very, very easy. I just want you to come over and make sure that in your shelf you're looking at the polygon shelf. Click on this and then click on the polygon plane and just drag out a nice big plane. The actual size doesn't really matter so much. I mean, in my case, I mean, if you guys want solid values, we could set it to something like 75. And then here in your translate X, Y, and Z, if you set all those to 0, it'll be nice and centered up. So that's pretty easy. That's just going to be the surface on which we'll do most of our work. Now, the next thing we need to do is create, well, I guess we'll pick on the object of my choice. Let's go ahead and build the plate that's going to hold our cake. Now, there are a couple of ways to do this, and I want to show you both of them just so that you, actually there's more than just a couple, there's a lot of ways to model something like a dinner plate, but I want to show you several and allow you to choose the one that kind of speaks to you the most, the one that you think is most effective for the way you want to do it. Fortunately for us, the plate is a rigid surface, and so you don't have to worry too much about deformation. The way we're going to be texturing it, you don't have to worry about UVs or anything fancy like that. We're going to keep this very simple. So the first way we're going to explore creating our plate is with polygon modeling. So let's start off by clicking on Polygon Cylinder. Oh, also, real quick, if you are planning on following along with me, and when I give everybody breaks to catch on, please make sure that you've hit the participate button at the top of BuzzNet. If you're just watching, you don't need to do that, of course. You can just leave yourself not set to participate. Just I use this to make sure that people are actually paying attention. So what I want to do right now is just run a quick test. I want everybody who is going to be following along to set their status to ready right now. This will give me an idea of who's actually following along and who isn't. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to keep things fairly simple tonight so that it's going to be easy to follow along and get the results that you need. So let's start with our plate again. I'm going to click on under polygons on the polygon shelf. I'm going to click on the cylinder button. Conversely, you can go to Create, Polygon Primitives, and make a cylinder. Or another way to do it, which is pretty fancy, is if nothing is selected in your viewport, and this is important, make sure that nothing is selected in the viewport. You can hold down Shift and right mouse, and you get some various polygon primitives you can make here, so you can choose polycylinder right here. Now, the size of this plate can be completely arbitrary. I just want to point that out. So I'm going to come in here to the grid, hold down the X key, and what X is going to do is grid snap us. That means we're snapping to the grid. And here in just a second, I'm going to take a moment and we'll talk about the specifics of snapping. So I'm going to hold down X and just drag out from the center. You can release X now at this point. And just drag out a pretty nicely sized disk. Again, the actual size that you choose is not that particularly important. Your next step is to drag up a little bit to create the thickness of the plate. And there you go. Now, if you want to know my exact numbers, you can see I came up with a radius of about 7.28 and a height of 0.462. But these are all arbitrary. When you finish your plate, it's actually very, very easy to size it up and down. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to do is change a few things about this plate. If you take a look, now earlier when we were talking about the viewport, we said that we could hit the 4 key to go to wireframe, just as a quick review, the 5 key to shade up the view, the 6 key to take a look at textures, and the 7 key to look at lighting. Now we're not going to be using texturing and lighting for just a little bit, but it's good to know it's there. Anybody remember what the 1, 2, and 3 keys do? You might not have actually seen them because we didn't really talk about them. 1 is going to show you polygon smoothness or subdivision surface smoothness of 1. 2 is going to smooth your model out and show its polygon cage. And 3 shows you a smooth result. So you can see what this plate would look like if you were to smooth it, which is pretty fancy. We're going to make use of smoothing just to make this plate look a little cooler, but we're going to do this kind of one step at a time. What I want you to do is take your subdivisions caps and set those to 2. What that'll do is create this little concentric ring right in the center of your plate. Now, with that done, now we're going to do a little bit of modeling. So if you've never done any modeling before, don't be too frightened. We're going to take this very, very slow. Let's hold down the right mouse button and choose edges. So once again, let's hold down the right mouse button and choose edges, or just edge. Double click on this little ring here in the center. And all I want you to do is grab the scale tool, so just tap the R key and scale this down a little bit. We're just kind of getting it out of our way, to be honest. All right. Now once you have that, we're going to do something a little bit fancy. I want you to press F8 and go back to object mode. And I'm going to do a really quick ready check. We're going to keep these kind of frequent, at least at the beginning. So here's a quick ready check to see who's got this done. Now whenever I've got you guys working, and if you're following along and I ask for a ready check, here's what I want you to do. If you're still working, make sure you set your status to 1 minute. If you're done, just set it to ready. The only people I want to see left at not ready are people who are not really following along. So as soon as I ask for a ready check, if you're still working, just take a moment, reach up and click 1 minute, and I'll know that you're still plugging away and that I need to hold up for you. So right now, I've got some people who aren't following directions, those being Creative HD, Game Designer 73, H Partidas, and there you go. So Game Designer 73 and H Partidas are not following directions. I can't get the cylinder to rise up. Please make sure you put official... It's no problem, H Partidas. I'm just reminding you. If you have an official question that I need to address as a part of the video, I would appreciate it if you put that over in the webinar system, because sometimes I lose stuff in the chat room. But let me go back to creating a cylinder. I'm just going to click on the cylinder button here. Creating a cylinder is a two-step process. First, you drag out the radius, then you drag up the height. If you accidentally clicked, like you just did this, and you click, then you have a zero height cylinder, and then dragging up, all the dragging up in the world won't help you. In those cases, you can take your polycylinder and you can try increasing its height, but it's probably broken. This is just a funny little quasi feature for Maya, so if you need to, just delete it and build another one. Okay. So now everybody seems pretty much caught up. I think we're close enough for me to move on. I will be kind of moving on with the majority, folks. I kind of have to do that. So if I end up leaving you behind, please understand that I don't mean anything personally. Okay, so now here's what we're going to do. To make this into a plate is a little bit concave. You know, it dips, it kind of comes up around the edges to hold in any liquids and whatnot, and we're going to use that to our advantage. So I want you to, once again, hold down the right mouse button and choose Edges. I want you to double-click on this outermost edge, and then hold down Shift and double-click the edge directly below it. So you get something like this. Next, I want you to get your Move tool and pull these up. You don't need to go very far. You're not making a bowl here. So you're just going to pull up just a little bit to create the indentation for your dish. Now I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to hit F8 to go back to object mode. I actually had to hit it twice in my case. And just while we're modeling, I'm going to hide my floor. So I'm going to select this and just hit Control H. Incidentally, I'm going to put the grid away as well. Now there's a button in the toolbar you might have already seen that allows you to hide the grid. Okay, so now we start to be able to do some more fun stuff with the modeling process. So hold down Shift and right mouse. Now you have to be in object mode for this to work, so make sure you see a green wireframe. If you don't see a green wireframe, then you won't be able to do this. Shift right mouse and choose Insert Edge Loop Tool. Then you can just click and drag on any one of these edges. Now take a look at my settings. My settings are just insane. I'm adding like 1,000,000 edges here. So that's no good. I need to undo that. And I am going to go into my Insert Edge Loop tool and change my settings back to default, because apparently they got changed at some point. Yeah, insert number of edge loops set to 10. I don't think so. Now the way I did that, if you need to know, there's a couple of different ways. While you're in the Insert Edge Loop tool, now it says Shift right mouse doesn't seem to work for me. Well, make sure a couple of things. I mean, it should, first off. It's one of the more popular ways to actually access the modeling tools, but if it doesn't, there's other ways to access them as well if we need to do this. One, make sure you have your objects selected in object mode or you won't be able to see the proper menu. That's the big thing. Now, if you don't get any marking menus for any reason, that's going to be a bug in Maya. You might want to consider restarting. Now, you can also make sure you're in the polygon menu set, which you can do by pressing F3. And under Edit Mesh, you should be able to find pretty much all of these tools. They do keep a few over in the Mesh menu as well, so that can be kind of fun to have to jump back and forth between these two menus. Hence why I generally use Shift and right mouse. But there's the Insert Edge Loop tool, about a quarter of the way down. Yes, when you're trying to whenever you're trying to bring up a marking menu in Maya, you need to be holding the button down at all times. You can get into object mode by tapping the F8 key. You may need to do it twice depending on what components you have selected. You just want to make sure you see the green wireframe. So in any event, if I shift right mouse, I can hit the options box for the insert edge loop tool and I can change those settings. And I'm just going to make sure that my number of edge loops is set to 1. And then I can reach up here to the upper right-hand corner and kill my tool settings. Now yours is probably already set to 1. Mine just happened to be set to 10 because I was playing with it, I think last night. So now I'm just going to click. And this automatically puts in a brand new edge loop. What I want you to do is take this edge loop and pull it down a little bit. And you can see how you're starting to get that kind of dish-like shape, where it raises up a little bit in the center, but it comes down at the outsides. My plate is a dark blue wire frame, can't find edge thingy. Well, Marco, let's take a look at your screen. Alrighty, so what I'm seeing here is, if you would, hit the 5 key for me. And if you have a microphone, I can't hear you, or you seem to have muted it. Actually, let me do this too. I'm going to go over to your computer, and I'm going to request mouse and keyboard control. Okay, now don't fight me for just a minute. Let me just have a look around here and see what you've got. So this is a polycylinder. That's good. Let's start off just by jumping you back to component mode. I'm sorry, to object mode, excuse me. And we'll just hold down the right mouse button. We want to make sure that we have edges selected for just a minute, and everything seems to be selectable and looking pretty good here. So I'm going to press F8 and go back to object mode. Then shift and right mouse together, and there's my insert edge loop tool. I can just click on one of these edges, and this allows me to make a brand new edge. That's pretty much all we needed right there. So there you go. You have a new edge, and your job is going to be to just take that new edge and pull it down slightly. Now see, in this case, your plate is very thin. It's a lot thinner than mine. That's not necessarily a problem. What I would do in your case is I would thicken it up a little bit. And you can do that just by grabbing this outer edge here. Remember that we double-clicked to grab that entire loop? Ooh, Maya doesn't want to do that. Let me see if Maya's being dumb. Nope, everything seems to be in order. So we just want to make sure that we have that entire loop, even if we had to select. There we go. I just had to click a few times. So it seems to be a feedback issue sometimes with GoToWebinar. It doesn't really like to give me full control sometimes. So we can pull this up, and that'll thicken up the plate a little bit. You can also pull this up just a little bit, slightly. And now you've got a little bit more depth to work with. So you could, as you can see, you've got a little bit more of a slope here at the outside of the plate. So you've got everything that you need, and your question was that you can't find the edge thingy. It was there the whole time. You just want to make sure that you're in object mode before you actually use it. Now, I don't want to do your work for you. So what I'm going to do is basically tap the undo key until I get you all the way back to where you were. And then because I'm kind of vicious, I'm going to select something out in the distance so you lose the ability to just undo and get right back to where I was. So I really want you to do this on your own. Just make sure that you're in object mode, which you are now. And then you should be able to hold down shift and right mouse, and here's your insert edge loop tool. And that's where you're going to begin. And I'll go ahead and set myself back as the presenter because you've got a little bit of work to do. Okay, so we have our dish set up. Now if we hit the 3 key to see what this looks like smoothed, it's actually not half bad. I mean, that's a passable dish even in and of itself. But we're going to make it look a little bit better. Let's go ahead and hit 1 again. This edge, you see how like when we hit 3 and just press F8 real quick, you see how you got this really gradual slope? I mean, I've seen plates like this, but this is a very boring plate as far as I'm concerned. So let's make it look a little less boring. Here's how we're going to do that. Let's press 1. And I'm going to go back in and select edges. Now I do that once again by holding down the right mouse button and choosing edge. I'm going to double click this new ring that I've made in the center of the plate, and I get to use a new modeling tool now. We're going to hit Shift, right mouse, and bevel. Now my offset on that was huge, but if we take a look over in the inputs on the right hand side, we have some settings for that bevel operation, which was called Poly Bevel 1. It has its very own input node. What I want you to do is select the offset property and carefully pull it down. Now I'm using the virtual slider. If you remember how to do this, it's to select a property in the channel box, and then you can use middle mouse to adjust it. But I want to show you a secret, something that will come in very handy. Right now you'll notice my virtual slider is very chunky. It's moving in increments of 0.1, which is really huge for our purposes. Watch this. Stop what you're doing and take a note of this. Right up here above your channel box you have these 3 little icons. The first of which allows you to switch between manipulators, no manipulators, and channel sliders. Click on this once. That turns off your manipulator. You now no longer have manipulators in your view. Press it again and you've switched over to channel sliders. Now, here's an interesting thing. I don't know why this is set up the way it is, but it's just how it is. You'll notice the second icon suddenly becomes visible, or it becomes not grayed out. It's active. This allows you to switch between slow, medium, and fast channel sliders. Click on this a couple of times and set it down to slow, which is a tiny little wedge from the pie graph. When you're done, turn your manipulators back on. So just to walk you through that again, we clicked on this tiny little widget twice. Then we clicked on the little pie graph next to it twice. And then we clicked on the widget one more time. Now what did all of that do? Now if I click on offset and use my middle mouse button, I have a lot more precision. So now if I hit 3 and press F8 to get out to object mode, you see I've got a little bit of a crease starting to show up there in the plate. Yes, you still have to do that. It's not fun, but you still have to do it. Now, how did we get into bevel? Came in from Steven. Very easy. In fact, what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to tap undo a few times and get all the way out to before I created the bevel. So here I am at just that edge loop. I double click to select the loop. Now bevel is a modeling tool, a polygon modeling tool, and all of your polygon modeling tools can be found by holding down Shift and right mouse. And there's bevel edge right there. Boom, you got a bevel. So now you can just take your offset property and use middle mouse and pull that down. All right. Next, I'm going to press the Y key. Now, what did Y just do? Anybody want to try to fancy a guess what Y does? The tooltip is actually telling you. It brings up the last tool that you did. That's right. Wick is all over it. It's not the last command. There's a difference in Maya between commands and tools. For instance, bevel was a command. The insert edge loop tool is a tool. So Y is going to bring up our last tool, and in my case, that was the insert edge loop tool. Now, if you have used any other tools since then you won't be able to do that. You're going to want to go back out to object mode, shift right mouse and choose the insert edge loop tool, or alternatively, go under edit mesh and dig it out of the gigantic menu. Either way, get back to the insert edge loop tool. I'm going to insert another edge loop right about midway along here. I'm also going to change my settings just a little bit because I feel like I'm getting, I'm still using equal multiplier. I don't want to do that. And relative distance from edge, we'll switch that on. Basically what I need to do is reset the tool to its default settings. Evidently I was playing with it last night and forgot about it. Okay. Now, since I can't just drag mine, I mean I could undo it and I could and add another one, but I'm not. I'm just going to scale this and tighten it up a little bit, just a tiny little bit, like so. And NATO just made a really good point. If you get lost on what your last tool was, you can see it in the left. This is in the toolbox under the Show Manipulator button. You see my last tool was the Insert Edge Loop tool. Alternatively, you could just click on that button. Now, my edge selections are yellow and red when I select them, which is causing issues. It's probably only causing issues if you're trying to move those edges around. If you want to make them stop, make sure you tap the B key. What that means is you have soft selection on. So like if I kick up soft selection and I get this kind of softening effect, just tap B and that'll go away. All right. So now I've got this extra ring, and now I'm going to do something a little bit fancy. If you seem to be stuck on your tool, tap the Q key and just evoke some other tool. I'm going to right mouse and switch over to faces. Now I've got to select all of these faces in here, which means I could sit here and click on each one while holding the Shift key. That works. Or you could switch over to Paint Select, hold down B and make my brush small. So I'm using B and middle mouse to make my brush nice and tiny. And I can just paint that entire area. Either way is fine with me. Just don't marquee select because you'll end up selecting faces on the underside of the plate, and I don't want you to do that. So I want everybody to get these faces at the center of their plate selected, and I'm going to give you a quick ready check to see who's following. Oh, look at... Oh, we have all these people switching over to 1 minute. You have no idea the joy that that fills me with. To see people who are following directions. It just makes me happy. Just unbelievably happy. Now, if you have questions, make sure you let me know. I can't see my manipulator for some reason. Make sure that when you were cycling over here in your channel box, you didn't just leave that off because you won't get a manipulator. You can actually turn those off. My keyboard died in Maya. Ooh, that's not good. But only in Maya. Restart Maya with your mouse as quick as you can. Yeah, it sounds like Maya might be being stupid and maybe about to crash on you. How did you brush those faces? I used the Paint Selection tool, which is located over here in the toolbox. Save your work if you can and restart Maya. Veliko. I'm assuming that's Veliko. I can't seem to find the Edge Loop button when I shift right click. Well, that's going to be dependent on what mode you're in. You'll only find the Insert Edge Loop tool if you're in object mode. So make sure you see the green wireframe first, and then when you shift right mouse, which I just actually almost threw my mouse across the desk. When you're in object mode and you do it, you'll see it. If you're not in object mode, say if you're looking